again for the invitation, and yeah, actually that's how it all started. Bill and I were talking, and I said, what happened to the Bracero program in the book, you know, the Dixon book? And I said, there's a gap, it seems to me, in terms of our city's history. And he agreed, and he's a wealth of information. He knew all about it and where they've all been located, so more on that later. But thank you again. I have notes, I have a cheat sheet, so my age, I forget things too. Yes. Okay, so I am going to talk about the Bracero program, but actually, after I started really looking at it, I decided I wanted to take a step back. And it's not just about the Bracero program, it's really about the Hispanic population, and that includes Portuguese and Spanish folks that migrated to the Americas. So you're going to hear a little bit about that too, and hopefully you'll find it of much interest as I did, as I started really exploring my background and this city's background in history. So a little bit of history lesson for you all as well, huh? All right, so let's begin with myself. I was born in Dixon, California. Dr. Long's office, and Anita's here. Dr. Long delivered me in 1958 down on East A Street. So I was born and raised in Dixon, and now my son went through Dixon High School, and now I have grandkids here. So I have a little bit of history as well, and very much a vested interest in what that history is. I want to talk about my parents' history, and I think some of you folks have probably seen some of that. My father passed away last October, and the Dixon Tribune did a beautiful job of running an article on our family's history, and there's a lot there. You might find some of this a little repetitive, but that's who we are, and I actually found a couple of mistakes, so hopefully we'll correct that as well. So, my father and my uncle, Jose de Jesus, and Al's here, my cousin Al is here, his father participated in the Bracero program, as did our other uncle, Tacho, who has also just passed away. We lost 3 brothers in 1 year, so it's, the Cornejo brothers are now upstairs together. It's wonderful. But they all participated in the Bracero program, and they signed up in 1952. They went to the next state, next to Jalisco, and that would be Guanajuato, and they signed up there. But more on that in the whole well, I'm not actually going to talk about that right now. When they went to Guanajuato, Mom talks about how they used to laugh about the process they went through. They went through the application process, they were screened, given a health checkup, and then they were put in a line and sprayed down with DDT. And they laugh about how funny that was, and I thought, man, that must have been funny now, but not, or when they talk about it, but not when they went through it and were asphyxiated with DDT. But that was part of the process to get through that program. So they went through that, and then Dad was sent to Salinas for 1.5 years through the Bracero program. And he was in Salinas mostly, obviously, during the season. He would work there, and then he'd return back to Mexico, as the other Braceros also had to do. Now, he married in 1954, and he would continue to do that back and forth. But in 1954, he decided that he had a wife now and needed to take care of her, so he applied for permanent residency, and they both received that, so they legally were able to enter this country. And what that meant was they also were able to work year-round. So he worked in, besides Salinas, he worked in Santa Maria, he worked in, I always forget the other one, down in Santa Barbara County, Casmalia, for the railroad. And he also worked in Santa Monica, where I have another uncle that worked down there. But then he would come back to Dixon. There was something about Dixon that kept drawing him back. So he would return to Dixon to work. But what happened is once he got his residency, he no longer had to be in the barracks. And there's a picture up here of my dad when he was in the barracks. And there's a picture of Mom. This is their wedding day. But he didn't have to live in the barracks anymore. So he worked for John Benetti, one of the ranchers here. And John and Dad became very, very close friends, to the point that when our brother Jose was born, he became his godfather. very, very close family, and worked for him for a number of years, as well as the Nishikawa farms as well. But he always came back to Dixon. It was the straw. Now, Mom thought that was all well and good until my sister and I started going to school. And she said, that's enough. We have to stay in one place. Our kids have to go to school year-round. So he agreed. So in 1964, he applied and was accepted for a position with Stillman Brothers Meatpacking Company here in Dixon. And he stayed, and he worked there until they actually sold back in 1981. And then he moved over to Armour. And I know both those places are gone, right? Us old-timers don't remember where they used to be. But he was so proud of having worked for Stillman Brothers. That, to him, was his world, and Dixon was his world. He was so proud of this country and what opportunities it afforded him. I now want to take a step back, and I want to talk about the bigger Hispanic population. And this is the part that I discovered during my travels, and I'll talk a little bit about my travels in a bit, but I didn't realize just how large an influx of Spaniards and Portuguese we really have had in this state. Not just this country, but this state. It's amazing. So what I found out is that this the biggest influx was between the last decades of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. And it was the most active migratory group behind only England and Italy. And it was close to the Austro-Hungarian and German immigrants. That's how many Spaniards and Portuguese came over. And bulk of that was between 1882 and 1947. Approximately 5 million Spaniards immigrated between that time period, and about 3.8 million actually returned. The rest stayed. And then that, unfortunately, some went to Mexico. Yes, you're right, they did, but it was a very small percentage. Between 1921 and 1924, the United States implemented the Immigration Act, which pretty much cut off all that immigration. So they had to go somewhere, right? They continued to migrate, and they migrated to Argentina. 60% of that group continued its migration to Argentina. 25%, and this somewhat surprised me, went to Cuba. The balance of that, the 15%, was broken out between Brazil, Mexico, the US, and Uruguay, and then other countries. Now, I mentioned my recent travels. I just got back June 9th. I did a 500-mile walk across northern Spain. It took me 43 days to walk across Spain. It's called the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, lovingly known as El Camino. Yes, I walked the Camino every single day, 10 to 15 miles a day, and it was amazing. And I needed to do that primarily because I wanted to reconnect with our roots. Our roots, the Cornejo roots and the Gutierrez roots, my mom's side, are based out of Catalan, and if you know where Barcelona is, that's the, I even said it right, Barcelona. That is where our five generation grandfather migrated from, and we have another great grandfather that came from the Burgos area. I walked and stayed in the Burgos area. I walked through Catalan. I walked across Galicia, which now I know is where my husband's forefathers and foremothers came from. It was amazing to me to stand there in front of these amazing cathedrals and these little marketplaces and know this is where my roots were based out of. So this is why this has been so exciting, thank you, for this opportunity to know more about it and experience that connection and have that chance. Now, the migration of the Spaniards also was interesting to me, was they were actually actively recruited by the farmers in Hawaii to do the sugarcane harvest. Did you guys know that? Yeah. Okay, so I didn't know that.
Well, you I didn't know
that. So over 8,000 Spaniards were recruited to go to Hawaii and work in the sugarcane industry. They were promised all kinds of things, great money, some property. Turns out none of that came to fruition. They went on strike and they said enough of this, and they left. Majority of them left. Guess where they went to? Across the ocean, closest place is California. So most of them came here to the Bay Area. And we had a group that actually, and this is where Bill sent me this amazing video, they actually ended up in the Vacaville area. And in 1932, again, they had been promised all kinds of things, like instead of 50 cents an hour a day, they were promised a $1.50, I think, for a day's work. And they were promised property and 8 hours. They wanted 8 hours of work, and they wanted no discrimination. All these very unrealistic expectations, apparently. But anyway, all those promises were broken. A politician had promised them that that was going to happen, and it never happened. So they went on strike. These people obviously were experienced on going on strike. Folks didn't know that. These people had experience on what it took to come together, and they did. They actually it was the AWIL was organized, and they actually did this strike, and it was actually very volatile. People were arrested, people were hurt. There's a video clip that you sent out and posted on our website.
Yes.
So if you
not on Vacaville Heritage Council, they can see it on that.
Maybe we can put a link.
Yeah, that's what we should do. Yes.
We'll put a link. I've not volunteered you to put a link. You'll find it's very well done. The narrative is excellent, and the graphics are very nicely done. So if you find any of this of interest, absolutely please take a look at it. All right. With all that said, I'm trying to stick to my time frame. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to talk, oh yes, and the last part about that immigration is the folks that immigrated to Argentina and maybe didn't come to the United States right away. Some of them also went to Argentina and then to Mexico, and some directly to Mexico. Now, we know this to be a fact because if you Google the name Cornejo in Argentina, it's as prevalent as Smith is here, or it's a very, very common last name in Argentina, so that's where I guess a lot of us went to, but they also migrated up to Mexico and then eventually to California, some of us, right? So what I'm trying to do is draw the picture of how people all started to flock or come into where we are now, and that's another route. Now I'm going to talk about the Bracero program. Now, the Bracero program, as I said, was instituted and created by the federal government, the United States federal government, in conjunction with the Mexican government, to address the shortage of labor during the World War II time period. So in 1942, it was launched, and it existed up until 1963. In 1963, they granted an extension for 1 more year, and it effectively sunset in 1964. This community, because of its agricultural roots and economic base, needed this type of obviously labor to be effective and have its economy sustained. So what we did, the group, the community, put together a 2-page ad, right here, Dixon Tribune, that says a sincere appeal to folks in the other 49 American states. And we state our cause about how much we need to keep this program in place, and we wanted it extended, and that we needed it for our livelihood. That didn't happen, unfortunately. What did happen is that it forced, I'm sure most of you know this, it forced our hand in the mechanization area. So, for example, the tomato harvester was actually developed in 1959, but it wasn't prevalent, it wasn't widely used because there wasn't a need. We had cheap labor, right? Well, that cheap labor wasn't as readily available anymore, so guess what? In the 70s, everyone now has a tomato harvester, right? Or other types of mechanization. Actually, to that end, to that point, my son-in-law is a manager in a company that sells internationally sorting machines, and they sort grapes and blueberries and raspberries, and they're getting into the olives. But this machine sorts it and just spits out the fruit at the end. So yet again, less need for manual labor. And so we're going more and more in that direction. But again, less people were needed. We still have in existence, however, a migrant camp here in Dixon. Even though the Bracero camps are now gone, we do have a migrant camp, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. So the Bracero program, as I said, 1942 to 1964, the first 4 years were during wartime. In its peak, the highest year of participation was in 1956, when my dad and my uncles were part of that. was when they had 445,000 men participate that year. Now bear in mind, these weren't, coming up and staying. These were folks that would come up and then return. So that's the most that ever participated in a given year, almost 500,000 of them. And they would come up and they would stay at various labor camps in Solano County, for example. They were throughout the state. But we had some in Dixon, and Bill, again, wealth of information, actually clued me in on some of the ones. I knew of the one my father and uncle stayed at, and that was the Garcia's camp. It was managed by Pete Garcia on Pedrick Road. And there was a big quantum hut. I don't know if any of you remember that. But here's a picture of what it looked like inside. It was just bed after bed after bed, cots that they were set up in. And they would dress in their uniforms. They had a very formal, it was an official program, right? There was also besides the Garcia's camp, there was the Galindos, the Reeses, the Mayorals. There's others, many others, but those are just a few, to name a few. What this program did is allow these men to work in various locations throughout the state, right? So they got to see what this country was like in a somewhat sheltered situation, good and bad. I mean, there was a lot of atrocities that occurred as part of any government-run program that's not very well supervised, shall we say. Like, we know they paid taxes and they had monies taken out of their checks that they were promised to have returned to them, and that never happened. Never got that money back. But that aside, it allowed them to travel. And so that's how they came to a small town named Dixon, right? And they were exposed to this community and the beautiful things a small community in this country offered to them. And that's a real positive, which is why people like my dad, like my uncle, my Jose Jesus, and Ramiro Enriquez, if you know the Enriquez family, they've been here since about that time period. They came up through that program as well. But what it allowed them to do as well is also establish a permanent residency. So it was a lawful entry into this country that was condoned by both countries. And as it should be, they were vetted and allowed to come to this country. As I mentioned, the migrant centers, it used to be called the Dixon Migrant Camp, and Maggie Catile, who's here, managed it for many years. And it was on Pedrick Road. Was that? Yes.
That was the first one.
That was the first one, yes.
And then the other one went to the Navy base.
Right, it's actually on Radio Station Road, I believe, in 1984. It was called the Rearman Migrant Center, because Mr. Rearman saw the atrocious conditions these men lived in when it was on Liberty, I believe. There was a camp out there on Liberty Island. Two of my uncles worked out there as cooks, and I would go out there to visit with my parents. And the men lived in these teeny tiny shacks. This was before living small was in. These shacks were horrible. Now everyone, a tiny nation, these little houses everybody wants, they're, ultra luxurious. No, these didn't even have toilets in them. These were little tiny shacks. And the conditions were horrible. So Mr. Rearman wanted to provide safe, clean housing for the workers that came and supported this area's industry. And that's a wonderful, wonderful place to be, is to be able to support those that support you. So it was named after him. Now, I happened to have worked out there one year, and I couldn't remember, Maggie, if it was 74 or 75. I worked at the daycare center when you were out there.
That would be on Pedrick Road.
That would be on Pedrick Road. And I worked at the daycare center and took care of some of these babies, and it was beautifully run. It was so well, it was immaculate. It was a small community out there, but they were also attached to this community, and they would come here and support us in other ways, obviously, by shopping here and going to church here. And some of them ended up staying here, and that was my point. And some loved it so much they ended up staying in Dixon, not in one of the many, many other towns they could have stayed in. They stayed here. Okay. Wrapping it up. So the transitory population has lessened, but has not completely been eliminated given our agricultural focus in this community. We still have people that come and go every year, and maybe one or two decide to stay. The Bracero program brought many families to our community and added their heritage and diversity to the patchwork quilt of our town's history, and they now call Dixon their home. I brought with me little information, if you want, on some of the migration patterns, the years, the Bracero program, lots of numbers. I also brought with me a book on a distant uncle who was a renowned artist. He painted murals in churches in Dixon. Very talented, beautiful, beautiful artist. And I just wanted you to know that, you know, there's great art everywhere. And the town that my family's from, our family's from, Jalostotitlan, Jalisco. If you've ever been, it's about an hour's drive from Guadalajara. Beautiful, small little town. But if you ever go there and visit the church, one of our uncles painted the murals. And it's 13 by 16 feet. These are huge murals. They're beautiful. With that, I open it up for questions. If anyone has any questions on anything.
Anybody have any questions for Maria?
No, I have an input for you.
Please.
You were talking about the Spaniards. I grew up going to school in Winders. I was the only Mexican kid around there. All of them were Spaniards. And there's a book one of the girls wrote called Paella. It's a really interesting, gives the history of all the Spaniards from the 1800s that migrated here. So if you have a chance, get it.
And thank you, Paella, the book. Okay, and Spaniard history in the area. Thank you, I will definitely. Anyone else?
Maria, can you tell us a little bit about your family? I mean, you told us about how your family arrived here, and just maybe tell us a little more about the brothers, your dad, and you know exactly what kind of work they did. I mean, I know you mentioned your dad worked at Stillman's, but your uncles, what type of work they did, and your family. I mean, the children.
My children.
Yes. Well, your family.
My brothers and sisters.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, yes, my father worked at Stillman Brothers, as I said, and my uncle followed him, and then my other uncle followed him, the Enriquez family. So they all worked at Stillman Brothers and Armour as well. So it's about family with us. They stayed as pretty much a unit, and my Tío, Uncle Tío Ramiro, is still here in Dixon, and my Tío Chuy, Al's father, passed away last year. And as I said, so did my father.
Tell what your kids went from being people from the rural area, how your children have developed and gone on. What are their careers?
Of course. Let me touch on my brothers and sisters as well. So my brothers, I'm the eldest. I worked for the state of California for 36 years. I retired 4 years ago as the Chief of Human Resources for the Department of Insurance, which is sort of the pinnacle. It's the highest point you can achieve as a CEA, Career Executive Assignment, with the state of California. My brother, my sister Martha, just retired from UC Davis. She was an IT, I'm going to get this wrong, program director, IT. She did IT as well. And then Jose is in Albuquerque, and he is in insurance, and he was the, for one time worked for a division in Albuquerque. It was the State Farm's New Mexico, so he was in New Mexico. Salvador now is in Japan. He works for Toyota. He was assigned to Puerto Rico for 3 years, and now has been transferred to Japan and just started there.
IT also.
He has a degree in IT, yeah, but he's now moved into a different area, more of an administrative area. And I'm going down the list. There's 9 of us. It's like Sal, and then it's after Sal, it's Abel. And Abel's right here. Brother Abel just completed his second master's. This last one from UC Santa Cruz. Last one was from Brooklyn College. He graduated from San Francisco State. His first degree was in stage management, or no, and his second one is in directing. And he's looking for a job.
I work as a professor of theater, so in South Florida mostly, 3 different universities in South Florida.
So proud of him, very proud of him. Okay, then it's Juan. Is it Juan? After you, then it's Juan. So Juan is an attorney from McClatchy Enterprises. He has his undergraduate degree from MIT, his master's is from Harvard, and his law degree is from Berkeley School of Law. Okay, then I'm going down. Then it's Lupe. Lupe is a manager with the state of California Department of Human Resources. Then it's Lourdes. Lourdes lives in New Jersey and she did get her doctorate in Spanish literature. Who am I missing? And then Efrain, the youngest. He is a manager with the state of California and works for Covered California. Very proud of him too. Yes.
And you graduated from Dixon High School?
Yes.
And what year was that?
1976. Yes, I was the first one. I was class valedictorian. Actually, we had a few class valedictorians and valedictorians in our family. So, smart trickles down. All right, so my children, I have 2 children. My daughter works for the Department of Education. She graduated from Sac State, and she has 2 beautiful children. I have 2 beautiful granddaughters who go to school here. And my son is a consultant with Deloitte International. He graduated from University of San Diego, which is the private university down there. Very proud of him as well. So we've all done, I think, relatively well. Dad would be very, very proud of us in terms of what we've accomplished. He would take us out to the field. I remember being 9 years old, Martha and I, and Jose, would be taken out to work in the field. He would take 2 weeks off vacation from Stoughton Brothers, and he wanted us to know the value of $1. Of course, we got paid 25 cents for one of those boxes of tomatoes, right? And we were more trouble than it was worth. We'd take these little salt shakers, and this was before when they used to spray pesticides and insecticides. We'd wipe them down, and we put salt, and we'd sit on the box and eat. And he's watching us eat, and we're working. He's lugging the boxes around. But that's how he taught us the value of $1, working the fields. And we try to instill that in our family as well. And I think we've done okay in terms of, doing okay in this community and earning our keep.
And so we're all 9 of you in that little white house by the school?
We live in the greenhouse. The little white house behind the school, that was my uncle.
I think outstanding might be a more accurate word.
Thank you very much. I'll take that. So that's where we're at now, and I hope to stay in Dixon. My mom is still here. She is in Mexico. She just left yesterday. She's down visiting family that she has down there, and my parents still have property. They have a store, the original store, and they have their beautiful home, and she'll go down there for, I'm sure, a while more. She still has a sibling, 2 siblings left that she still can visit.
How old is your mama now?
Mama is 81.
Where in Mexico?
Jalos, Totitlan, Jalisco. And there's a picture of the church here. We call it Jalos in that book if you'd like to see it. We actually have our home a block behind the church. Interesting story, when during the summer, lots of rainstorms, thunderstorms, and lightning storms. Very, very big church, big steeples, lightning rods on top. Lightning hits it. Our house actually rattles, and it's a huge house. We used to have horse stables in the back. And it just, but it's still there, it's fine. All right. I run over my time. Anything else?
Anybody else have anything?
Yes.
Bill?
I just wanted to mention that my son married a woman from Barcelona, and we were there for the summer, and we've been able to visit them in Barcelona. But I wanted to ask you, your very long walk, which is very impressive and intriguing, do you have any little tiny story or something that you could relate about your long walk? Somebody you met or something?
Oh, that walk was a major life-changing experience for me. And every person that I know who has done it says the same thing. We're actually pilgrims. It's a pilgrimage. It was, maybe a little history on it, if I may? Sure. All right. El Camino, it's actually over 1,200 years old. It was the route taken by St. James when he was in Spain. his relics, his remains, are actually housed in Santiago de Compostela, which is the end destination to this walk. The image or the symbol of the Camino is a shell. And the reason that that's the case is because the Camino isn't just one Camino. That means the road or path. I started in Pamplona, is where I started. And I would walk 10 to 15 miles a day depending on the stage. And there's 33 stages. We extended it and we added extra stages because sometimes we didn't feel like walking 20 miles a day. I met people from all over the world. I met more people from Korea than I've ever met in my life. So, and Germans. So the biggest population, the biggest, it's called wedge, but in terms of the pie, but percentage of people that walk in terms of a country are Spaniards. So the majority of people that walk it are Spaniards. The second biggest group are Italians. The third is German. Fourth are Koreans. And the United States is somewhere like fifth or sixth in terms of a group. But it started off as being a religious pilgrimage. If you're familiar with what a pilgrimage is about, these are people who were very devoted Catholics and would walk it to demonstrate their devotion or a promise made or something that culminates in coming to do homage. So people used to do this for many, many, many years, and then it kind of petered out during the wars. And then back in the late 60s, someone walked it and wrote about it. And once you write about it, everyone wants to see it, which is how Korea now knows about it, because the Korean walked it, and South Korean, I should probably qualify that. South Korean walked it, wrote about the beauty and the calmness and the tranquility and the zen that you get from walking. And all true. It's absolutely all true. So people walk it now, but people walk it for different reasons. It's become also somewhat of a tourist attraction. So last year we had over 250,000 people walk it. And those are just the people they were able to track, because these are the people that actually received the Compostela, which is a certificate, a completion certificate. And I received one, so they track me. But they say for everyone that they issue, probably 3 people don't even bother with it. So there's lots of people walking it. And you walk it at your own pace. You stay where you can stay, or if you want to book something or not. You stay in albergues, which are like hostels, but specifically set up for pilgrims. The people that I met, and the one thing I will take away to that is that everyone had a story. Everyone had a reason for being there. And even though, like myself, we didn't start off with that as our intent, you would share your story with someone at some point that you didn't know you had a story to share. I heard about people who were abused, mistreated, who just lost a spouse, who were sick, a child had just died, or all kinds of stories. And when you're walking day after day, your only focus is you and your thoughts. There's no distractions. It's just this landscape. It's just you and putting one foot in front of the other and thinking and praying. I prayed more Hail Marys going up those mountains. And that was my survival. As I'm walking up these hills, and I had this little zigzag thing I started to do, because that way you don't strain your knees. And I beat those 20-year-olds. My knees were fine. I had no blisters, and they did. So I would zigzag up the hill, and not under my breath, but I was saying it out loud, the Hail Marys. And sometimes it took 4 or 5 or 6 Hail Marys, but I get to the top, and pretty soon I'm at the top, and I can breathe, and that was fine. It was all good. But it gave me time to meditate. And if any of you are Catholic and say the Rosary, the Rosary is about meditation. It's not about the actual words. It's about where you go when you're praying. And so this was like 500-mile length Rosary is what it ended up being. And so you walk the Camino, and 3 things happen. You develop physically, you develop emotionally, and spiritually, even if that's not how you started. Every person that did it and ended had the same story at the end. It's beautiful.
How many people walked with you personally?
1.
Just you?
I started off with someone else, but because we have different paces and different interests, it was easier to just end up walking on our own. We always met up at the end. I had pre-booked all our places where we were going to stay. I'm one of these people that need to know I have a bed at the end of the day. I'm not that spontaneous. So she always knew where to find me. Yeah.
I understand the path isn't exactly smooth.
It's not just a path. Sometimes I would walk on pavement, sometimes on rocks, sometimes mud. I lost a shoe at one point. I was going up when it was raining really hard and it was mud, and the foot went into a puddle and the shoe didn't come back with it. So I only fell down once. I had my walking poles, my walking sticks, and they saved me many, many, many times. But you will walk up and down steep hills and dry creeks. I would walk down dry creeks and they were slippery. I didn't fall. I fell on a dirt path is where I fell. And sometimes the worst ones were you were walking along the freeways and there were paved paths along the freeway and the cars and what have you, and they would give you options. Sometimes they had what they call green options, and you could take a deviation. Sometimes it was a little longer, but there were like green paths along rivers or back roads. They were beautiful. And I would hear that. Usually the one sign I would always hear is that cuckoo, like a cuckoo clock. Cuckoos. They're apparently very aggressive birds, but they live along the rivers. So we followed a lot of rivers and creeks, and you would walk, and you could always hear a cuckoo. And I recorded it, and I sent it to my granddaughters, and they said, "Oh, it sounds just like a cuckoo clock." I said, "No, the clock sounds just like the bird." Yes, I'm sorry.
I have been absolutely fascinated by your description, because I have a daughter that grew up here and graduated UC Davis and then went in and became a French professor, especially with a medieval emphasis in her. She's in Michigan as a French professor there. Anyway, she and her husband, he worked extra this last year. They're both, he's almost 70 at this point, and she's in her 50s, but anyway, they are on this trip as we speak.
They're doing the Camino?
They're doing it right now, and they save their money so that they can start on the German-French border.
Yes.
There's one of those fingers that leads.
Yes.
And so they're going to ride their bicycles from there to the border with Spain. And they say then next summer, they figure that's going to take 30 days, and then next summer they're going to be walking the part you did from the border of Spain to the cathedral. And she tried to describe it, but you've done beautifully to show how important it is. I will mention they have a video or a movie, and I was so impressed by that movie.
You saw that
People
one?
are interested. It was fascinating to see how it affects people. But anyway, this has been fabulous to hear.
Thank you. The movie that you mentioned is The Way. Martin Sheen is in it. His son, Emilio Estevez, actually directed it. Emilio's son met his wife at one of the albergues. We stayed in that albergue.
Oh, really?
He met her brother. So Martin Sheen's twice removed brother-in-law. I don't know how it works. Anyway, so it's a great movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see their fascination with it from what you said.
I smiled when you said bicyclists, because I came to not like the bicyclists. Because they would come up behind us, and they're on the same path. They come up right behind us, and no ding ding, or then the next thing you know, they're like on top of you, and they're swerving, and they're horses. We had a few folks that had horses, which I don't mind the horses, except for they didn't pick up after themselves as they were walking.
No, they say it's too rocky to walk. I mean, you have to walk in the Spain.
There are very rocky areas, absolutely.
Did you run into any critters?
Critters.
Like snakes?
Things like that?
Lizards, frogs, butterflies, deer. There's a lot of deer. So northern Spain, it's been deforested for the most part. Most of Europe has been deforested, and they don't have very good soil, so what they plant is oat and wheat. So it's gigantic green carpet is laid over everything, right? That's all you see are fields and fields of green, low, waving, at least when I walked, or yellow or red, because they don't kill their wildflowers. They're everywhere. They're beautiful. And but the critters, so you would see the deer in the fields eating the wheat and the oat. out there. And that was it. No, I didn't see any wolves or anything like that. Even in the high mountain area, Bracero was the highest mountain we climbed, and even then we didn't see very many things. But yeah, no. At one point we were talking about wolves, and I came around a corner and I thought it was a wolf. It turned out to be a dog. But it was just within minutes we'd been talking about wolves. And took me by surprise. Yeah. I'm sorry.
And how long did it take you? Did you say 3 weeks?
So we were in Spain for 2 months.
2 months.
The first month we were in Madrid and then Pamplona acclimating because it's a much higher elevation. So we gave ourselves a week. And then afterwards we had to give ourselves a week to rest, right? So it actually physically took us 43 days on the road to walk it. But many people do stages. And they say the average person who walks it and gives himself a couple of days of rest will walk it in 33 days. We just didn't do that. Yeah.
Did you consult an online group, or how did you find all the places that you booked in advance?
So there's a number of publications out there that include the stages. John Brierley has a book, and he actually talks about the different stages, and he has recommendations in there. And then there's a number of websites, one that Gronze, GRONZE.com, and it actually tells you a listing of all the places you can stay at, and I just use booking.com. We can probably do a side conversation on that, right? Or, I don't want, we're running into your business, yeah. So I can talk more, I mean, if you want, afterwards, happy to share that. There's lots of resources.
We're good, go ahead.
There's one last question. It's just, did you see, this is one of the most majestic things I've ever seen, did you see the incense holder in Santiago de Compostela go across the altar?
Yes, and I thought it was going to land on me.
Yes.
It's 120 pounds.
It's about the size of that speaker.
No, it's about the size of this table. It's huge.
It's larger, but just let you know that size.
Yeah, and
it's right across on a large rope with 6 guys pulling on the rope.
You've seen it?
Yeah.
You've seen it? Yeah, it's amazing. The reason they do it is back 1,200 years ago when the pilgrims got there, they were housed on the 2nd level of the church, the cathedral. After having walked for days and days and days and not bathing, the church reeked. And this was their way of being able to stand the stench in the cathedral during Mass. So they would swing this thing to mask the smell. And they actually, when they got there, the pilgrims took their clothes up to the top. I went on the roof. There's the rooftop of the cathedral, and there's a big cement and stone receptacle. And they would throw their clothes in there and burn them when they got there, because that's the only way to purify them, is to burn them. And the interesting fact is that container is directly above where the relics of St. James are contained. So that was kind of interesting. Anyway, okay. That's it.